It is great to be with you. It feels like, and I'm sure it feels like to you all, that it's like eating a big elephant that really does have to be eaten all at once because there is so much going on, and every day it feels like just something new.
Yeah,
Even if you
yeah,
miss one day, something huge happens every single day. You
I
know,
know.
at the anti-Semitic incidents that are happening, like that bomb that was planted outside the synagogue. Then you have in Canada the shots fired, and then you continue to see this anti-Israel or anti-Jewish, in my opinion, rhetoric from people that are huge influences of negativity, such as Candice Owens and Tucker Carlson, just literally talking absolute, if I can say this, crap.
Yeah,
It's none of it is real. I mean, the fact that Tucker Carlson even can say with a straight face that Israel's the most ugly nation he's ever been to, it's just ridiculous. I can't
we're
believe that we're at a place in the world where we have so much knowledge at our fingertips. It only takes one Google, one search to dismantle almost everything these people say, and people don't want to. They don't want to. And then so it's just we've got a lot to do. So just hats off to all of you who are fighting the good fight and doing what we need to do, because we can't not do anything.
Thank you so much, Haley. But I just want to start from the very beginning. For those of you who may never heard you before, would you
Yeah.
please introduce yourself?
Yes, of course. Hi, everyone. My name is officially called Reverend Hayley Ace. I am a minister with my husband, who is the head um, of a congregation, a Christian congregation in England. We also have a charity called Christian Action Against Antisemitism that we set up in May 2021. And that was really as a result of during COVID, we started learning, or I started learning about the history of anti-Semitism. I was wondering, where does this all come from? And it was really after that war in Israel in 2001. I couldn't believe this backlash that Israel was getting such a hard time when they didn't start it. It was in response, a defensive war. And my husband is very learned. He's also a minister, he's a theologian, and he was writing a book during COVID. And it was the history of Christian anti-Semitism. We have a lot of children, um, more than five, less than 10. We have seven. And so I'm always busy with the kids and doing the mum duties and trying to do what I can as a minister that supports my husband. And then when I found out and I read his book every night, he would give me a page that he'd written. And I just felt so incredulous that this is so active in the world that we still see in 2021, just taking you back to that place, we still see people holding signs showing canards that literally was set up in the 3rd century by the church, such as the Jews killed Jesus, Christ killers. And I couldn't believe that this is actually what it's like, because unless you look, you don't see it. If you're somebody that's not in the Jewish community, unless this is something that you haven't educated yourself in. And as a Kiwi, I'm actually a New Zealander, although I know I sound British. Um, I have New Zealand is actually where I'm from. We weren't taught about the Holocaust, so I didn't know about the Holocaust until I watched Schindler's List, and I was so shocked that it was real. I didn't know that that had happened. 6 million men, women, and children slaughtered for their faith, for their ethnicity. Outrageous. And then the fact that we should know that, and everyone says history repeats itself. We are educated now, we're a society where we had the BLM movement, understanding people, Yet Jews are still fair game for racism in every part of society. And so we
Yes.
said that actually it needs to be more than a book. It needs to be a movement that we actively go into churches, we actively go into Christian spaces, and we teach Christians, because the majority of Christians do not know the dark history of Christianity. Most Christians, unless they have actively looked into anti-Semitism, um, they you can become a Christian very easily. It's not like Judaism where you have to go through a big process. You could do it in 5 minutes. And then you don't learn the history of the church when you become a Christian. You just learn to pray and read the Bible. And so it's a massive shock when Christians find out this very dark. I mean, Christianity was the reason the Crusaders, they wanted to protect Jerusalem from Muslims, but it wasn't just Muslims. Many Christians, historical leadership have said, why fight the enemy abroad when we can fight the enemy within? Let's first sort out the Jews. They led inquisitions, pogroms, forced conversions. Even post-Holocaust, there were pogroms led by priests. In the actual Orthodox, in the Greek Orthodox, still up to 2020, they were still using the same words against Jews in their Easter liturgy, which talks about Jews being odious and perfidious, which that whole the words are meaning you just can't trust them. They're just wrong. There's something wrong with them. They killed Christ. These words were still being used in the church, and the church was such a powerful force before social media and throughout the Middle Ages and going on and on. That was the main place that people were educated about the basic things. And it wasn't until the Bible was actually translated into English from Latin that people could then read it for themselves and then see that, oh, God doesn't say we should go and kill the Jews. It doesn't say we should make war on the Jews. It says we should love the Jews. We should give money to the Jews. That's what it literally says. Jesus says, I haven't come to replace anything of the Old Testament. It's not even called the Old Testament. And all of this new learning came, which is why the first Zionists were Christians. And that's why there was such a great partnership with Herzog and William Heckler, who was a Christian, and the Oxford Union, which was called the Holy Club. And it was founded by one of the founders of the Wesleyan movement in Oxford University, England, where they said, we need to find a way to re-establish, now that the British have control of the British Mandate of Palestine, we need to set things right and return the Jews who have been scattered, forced expulsion. We need to right that, because they were convicted on what Christianity had done to the Jews, which is why they were so active in helping the movement of political Zionism. But it was very much pushed from the Balfour Declaration, who was friends with William Heckler, to be something that said, we know the Jews are from Judea. This is where they should be. They should be given the whole mandate of Palestine. Obviously, we know the Arabs didn't like that, so they got like what they got, a little sliver. And once that was established, it's like all education just fell off, because you have, and I don't just want to like monologue at you, but there's such a huge subject. But then you have the journalists who then wrote, they were Christian journalists who wrote the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which is a piece of fantasy literature, written as if it was written by an evil cabal of Jews on their plan to take over the world. We don't know if it was satire. We don't know if it was done deliberately. I always err on the side of how could it not be deliberately harmful? And so then the trope, the Jews control the world, was born. And then straight after World War II, and you have this explosion of Hollywood, where obviously Jews were expelled from so many different professions. They weren't included in anything. That was like a guild and things like that. It was harder. It was just more difficult for Jews, if you look into the history of it. And then Hollywood became this amazing place where many, many Jews would work. And then it became successful because that's what they could do. And so they made it successful because Jews are a blessing to the world and they do put their hand to the plow. There is a lot of hard work. I've seen that as a real foundational value of many Jewish families that I know, and very many Jews that I know, that there is this commonality of purpose that is very much centered around excellence, education, and hard work. And I don't know if that's a Jewish value that's pushed, but I know that that's what I see objectively with the Jewish communities.
Yeah.
Bearing in mind, I normally would speak in shul once a week. I mean, I go to shul more than most Jews, honestly. I go to Friday night service often and Saturday. I often speak after the service before Kaddish on a Saturday. And this is something that I noted. But then that helped, that success in Hollywood helped flame the embers of the Jews control the world, because Hollywood is so, we all go to entertainment. And the Christians remained ignorant. And so our fight really, what our purpose we feel is that our audience is really Christians who do not know, and so thereby are silently complicit. They'll walk past an act of obvious anti-Semitism because, number one, they don't recognize it as anti-Semitism, because two, there is somewhere in them that thinks that that is truth, i.e., because the church has never addressed it, mostly.
Mm.
So yeah, so that's what we do. And then October the 7th came around, and we just, I guess we supercharged everything that we were doing, because we realized, less than 24 hours after the biggest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust, people are letting off fireworks, celebrating, saying "Gas the Jews" on the Sydney Harbour steps, saying it was a proud moment, and that this new beast, social media, was being used to celebrate, justify, and then you had the marches, and they were ready with their placards. The very next day, on October 8th, they marched through London. And so we realized we have to do more. We have to be more public. And so really at that point, I then gave everything full time to focusing on Christian Action Against Antisemitism, training. We led many events in London, public marches. We did the first vigil for October 7th, which was outside of the Jewish community, which was the first against anti-Semitism after October 7th, which was on about October the 17th. And we had about 8,000 people come to London outside Downing Street. And we had Iris Haim, who's the mother of Yotam Haim, who was sadly mistaken for a Hamas operative in Gaza, and he was slain. And we had Noam Sagi, who was the son of Ava Sagi, who was taken into the tunnels. And so we had this whole event, and we realized we need more street action. And so since that point, we have supported or organized ourselves over 100 street activism. And we partnered with Stop the Hate a lot for street activism, because I don't believe in like reinventing the wheel. If an organization already exists, then once our people are trained, we like to plug them in to an existing thing. We don't want any credit. We don't want any, oh, aren't we so virtuous for fighting anti-Semitism? We just want, all shoulders to the plow. So if it exists, there is a street level activism, then that's where we funnel people to street level activism. If there's something online that needs doing, then that's the next thing. If there is a whatever it is
Yeah. Yeah, we
is
were
kind of
just talking about how we need to people in city halls, right? Remember? I
yeah,
think we didn't get to dive into that, but there's a lot of infiltration on city halls. Like really,
yeah,
literally, they're taking over the West one city at a time, and so we need our people there. I want to
yeah.
go back with what you just mentioned before. This was our previous conversation when you literally took our breath away with the explanation of where anti-Semitism comes from and how it unfolds in the Christian world, because the generation that we grew up in a world where Christians is someone we think of as allies, people like you. This is what we know as Christians, right? But then you
I'm
took us,
glad.
yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
Christians, it's like, yay, that's what we think. Like this is how that's what we know, right, from our
Mm,
generation. But looking backwards and, of course, into World War II and everything that happened, going all the way back to the transition from Judaism to Christianism, I feel there's like a black hole there. Like
yeah,
it's something even Christians, since the talk that we had, I found myself explaining that to Christians
that's
friends.
right.
That's
Because they
like
don't
they
look
just
into the
don't know.
history. They don't know.
Yeah. So
I mean, sorry.
yeah, so just like if you could take us in an orderly fashion, what
Yeah.
happened? Jesus was a Jewish rabbi. How did
Hmm.
we get called Yoshua, living in Jerusalem, teaching synagogue, the temple in Jerusalem? And then 300 years later, we have a global religious called Christianity. How
Christianity,
did
no
we go?
problem.
How did we went from that to there, and how
Yeah.
that brought also the hate towards Jews and why? Just
Yeah.
sum it
Okay.
up for us.
I
In
will
brief.
do. So yes, as you're quite right, Jesus, Yeshua, is was Jewish. All of his disciples Jewish. All of his first believers Jewish. Even in the New Testament or the Second Testament, in the Book of Acts, it talks about the fact that any any Jew or any Gentile who decided to believe that Yeshua was the promised Mashiach from the prophet books in Daniel and Joel, Isaiah, etc., Jeremiah, they would have to convert to Judaism. There was no such thing as Christianity. There was no such understanding. It was called the Way, and it was almost like, I guess it would, the only thing you could compare it to would be like the Lubavitch, where the Lubavitch, uh they think the Mashiach was the Rebbe.
Yeah.
That's my understanding of it anyway, as I've been told by them. I'm really good friends with a lot of Chabad rabbis, but they're still Jewish, right? No one would say they're not Jewish because they have that belief. So this was the the foundation of what Christianity was built on. It was very much Jewish. They didn't have any gospels, no New Testament. They just had Torah. They just had synagogue. They would Shabbat um, on Friday night, Saturday, with every other Jew doing the same practices, the same everything. And then after the death of Jesus, they would then gather as the way on a Sunday to say, we're marking that Hamashiach is gone too. And then one day he'll come back in the future. So it's very Jewish. Then Paul, the apostle, he went out into Europe, and basically what Jesus had these 12 disciples, which some of you might know, and they were all Jewish. So they would have all been bar mitzvahed. They would have all had their the temple rites at 8 days, circumcised as per the law of Moses, all of them. Some people say Luke may have been a Gentile, but there's not that much proof of that, and there's not any in the Bible that says he definitely was. And they sliced up the whole world, and they said, right, there's 12 of us. Let's spread out and tell everyone that there is now a gospel that can include Gentiles, that it's not just Jews that can find atonement from sin, it's everybody. And so, for example, Thomas, he went to India. Paul, he went to Greece and Cyprus. And so this is how it's spread out. It's spread out Jewish. Everyone's saying that.
So the first thing they changed basically was you don't have to become Jewish, which is like very heavy, and like there's
Yeah,
like over 600 rules that you have to keep and all
yeah.
that. You don't have to do any of that anymore in order to become Jewish. You can just say that you're in and then you're in.
Yeah, and they said, look, you're not Jewish. There's a big discussion about this in the Book of Acts, which makes up one of the books of the New Testament, and it talks about this discussion that they were having, saying it's very hard for Gentiles, especially the men, when they have to be circumcised, and not many men want to be circumcised. Which, any men on here, if you're not already circumcised, I'm not sure you'd want to be circumcised in those days with that type of equipment that they would have had. So to make it easier for the Gentiles, they said, look, you're not going to be Jewish. Even many Jews can't keep all of the 613 rules of Leviticus. But we're just telling you that you can get atonement from your sin, keep the 10 commandments, and that's what we're here to tell you, because final atonement has been made. No more animal sacrifices, because before that, if you know your temple history and then your tabernacle history, it would be Aaron and the Levites, the priests, they would atone for one sin. So every year, you know this, if you're Jewish, you have your time of repentance.
Yeah, Yom
But
Kippur.
yeah, Yom Kippur, right? Is that no, not Yom Kippur.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And so to take away the need for constant blood sacrifice, death, it's basically swapping something for death. Death brings sin. That's what the Old Testament, First Testament, is what Moses taught. And so therefore, having something else take the place of that sin, i.e. killing an animal, then the sin goes on to the animal. So they said the Gentiles now don't have to be Jewish, because it's in a
too
message of
much.
inclusion, which is actually all throughout the prophet books and the Torah, that really this is for everybody. Hashem is for everybody. But Jews are very, very special to chosen for a very specific thing, to be a prophet nation and to retain Torah, and that's what they did. They've been very successful at that, and it hasn't come without a very high cost for the Jewish people. It's terrible what the Jewish people have had to suffer throughout all of the centuries. So for 300 years, it's a Jewish rooted faith. They have the Torah. Paul is writing letters. It's encouraging this new church, which is in Greece and in Cyprus and all around the world. He's writing little books, which is actually what makes up the New Testament. They are letters that Paul wrote, and 4 of the disciples, then also Matthew, Mark, John, and then James. They had their addition to this. So these are just their little accounts, first-hand accounts, which then makes up a lot of what we find in the New Testament.
So what happened after 300 years?
So then what happened, as this grew, and it was very, very successful, it grew really quite quickly. Then it got to Rome, and Constantine learned about this gospel of atonement, and he decided, I am going to take this on. But I can't ever sit under a Jewish faith, because, as you know, the Jews were very much second-class citizens. Romans here, everyone else here, Jews like somewhere down at the bottom. And so because he took this on, he was like, I don't want that. And so there was a council that was created shortly after called the Council of Nicaea. And this is where they discussed, we need a separation from Judaism, and we need to make a new thing. Let's call it basically Christianity. Christ followers make sense. And what we'll do is we'll turn all of our pagan places of worship where they were worshipping Apollo and all of the Greek gods, Roman gods, we'll just turn all of those pagan places of worship, we'll call them churches, and this is now ours because we don't get ruled by Jews. Jews are
Yeah.
lower than us. And so that's really where it all began. And then you've got obviously the majority of the Jewish people were like, well, no, Jesus is that's actually idol worship. And this is not some Jews, many Jews thought actually he doesn't fulfill the requirements of the prophets. So then they would argue. I don't know if you're Jewish, but apparently Jews like to argue. That's what I've heard.
This is how,
You get
yeah,
three Jews and you get 10 opinions or something like that.
yeah, it's how we learn. It's through argument. So
I
a
loved
lot of
it.
people say, but yeah, but Jews didn't agree with Jesus. I was like, Jews don't agree on anything. This is how we are. So it's
Exactly.
really part of the faith. So the entire process is summed up by the mythological sentence that you told me last time you were here. You said, the more the Rome adopt
The
Jesus,
closer to the further away from Israel and from the birth of with Jesus and the disciples got, the further away it got, the closer to Rome. That's essentially the break. That
yeah.
was the break.
And then we
And
go
because
through hundreds of years, right? Where
And
the
that's because
church,
he was an emperor. So then he made it the national
mm,
religion of Rome, which is why you have the Vatican and the birth of the Catholic Church, which is now very powerful, very rich. And in actual fact, I just learned by a prominent property developer and owner in Israel that the Catholics own more of Jerusalem than the Jews do
of course.
because through history, through years and years and years, centuries
Yeah.
of Christian domination. So then you just had this religion, which within 100 years from that Council of Nicaea, remember the one I said that created this like separation, you have the early popes saying things like, because they didn't like that the Jews were arguing with them that they were wrong, that Jesus was the Messiah.
Mm.
Jews were just being Jews. Well, we're just talking about it.
Yeah.
But the Romans didn't like this second class citizen because there was still a lot of racism, thinking that we've got it wrong. So then what they did is the popes, the early popes, and what they say is awful. In fact, I can send you some quotes if you ever want to share them with other people. They talk about the fact that Jews are odious and perfidious, which is the statement I opened with, which is what they said to the Greek church, which is what the Greek church still used up until 2020. That they are killers of Christ. There's a lot of killers of Christ. They killed our savior. They blah blah blah. And so because the whole books and all of the books that got compiled in the 3rd, 4th century, which became the New Testament, everything was turned into Latin because it was in Rome. So they turned everything into Latin. So the common man, which makes up the majority of people, can't speak Latin. There is no education system. They don't know it. They only know to go to church because that's what you do. The priest speaks in Latin and then at the end says, well, to let you know, God says, because the Jews killed Jesus, we are to go and make war with the Jews. So
Mm.
that's why people were so emboldened. So this has got a very deep historical root in Christianity. The Jews killed Jesus trope, the Christ killers, they rejected Jesus, and all of this stuff.
And so we go on to, so we go from Jesus is actually a Jewish, living a Jewish life in Jerusalem. And we go on to a bunch of his disciples writing about what he's doing, what he said, making it way easier for people to join.
Yeah.
Suddenly it gets picked up by the biggest empire on the face of the earth,
Yeah.
and it becomes a huge globalized enterprise, right?
Yeah.
And so, but we stay local, we stay, so there's this tension between the local and the global, between something that is indigenous and something that
Yeah.
has an empire mindset. And
And
so
100%.
a lot of people still don't understand till today. And I had that asked by a Christian saying to me, but what is it with you in Israel? Why are you so connected to the place? I'm just like, we're just from there, right?
Yeah.
So the idea that you could be a Christian anywhere, but Judaism is only in Israel, made Israel kind of like the place that you fight about on, right? So this is like where we are today.
Yeah.
Fast forward to today, what do you think it is that Christians, if you had a direct call to any Christian on earth, what is the thing that you want to say today to a Christian about Israel and about Israel being Jewish?
I would always, and I do have these conversations a lot, and in summary, I would always pull people back to the fact that Jesus is Jewish. Many people still deny that he's Jewish because they haven't been taught the Jewish roots. I talk about the fact that, you know, as Christians, we were birthed in Israel. This is where we come from. Where did we come from then, if not Israel? Where did Christianity come from then, if not Jesus, the Jew, with his Jewish 12 disciples, with the Jewish books that we read? 100% of this book that we read, written by the hands of Jews. So it's never linear because people have varying degrees of knowledge and understanding within the Christian world. And I would always draw them back to specific verses because a lot of Christians would say, yeah, but didn't the Israelites disobey God in the wilderness? And so therefore God said, I'm finished. Because quite clearly in the Torah, God does sort of say, right, I'm done with you lot. You keep on worshipping idols. I'm done with you. And I say, but then what does it say? Keep going. So what about King David, who was actually a Zionist, by the way? He ran a political entity. You know, David and Goliath, the stories that you read your children. What was he then? And it's almost like this veil is taken away as soon as you draw people back to the fact that this is a Jewish, 100% Jewish book filled with Jewish people, about Jewish people, written essentially for Jews. Everything in here was written for Jews.
Yeah.
There's a whole book called Jude and Hebrews, which is written only for Jews in the New Testament,
Mm,
i.e., Jews that have been circumcised that follow the 613 rules as well.
yeah.
Um, and they're indisputable facts. They are indisputable facts that Jesus and everything that Christians have comes from Judaism and Israel. A very important thing to remember or to ask people if they're Christians. Christians all believe in the idea that one day the Mashiach, Jesus, will return. And many people, for example, indigenous Christians, which there are still many in Israel, which would be Jewish ethnically, but follow the Mashiach, as in Yeshua, believe that it's not idolatry, that he does fulfill the prophecies. It says in the last book of the Bible, it says in Revelation that he is going to return as the Lion of the tribe of Judah. What is that if that's not Jewish?
Mm,
From the house of David. What David? King David, the Jew, the second king of Israel, who ruled from Jerusalem, says he's coming back on the Temple Mount. Very specific locations. It's not metaphorical Temple Mount in Missouri or, I don't know, wherever else they make up in the Bible Belt. It's specific. The Bible is very clear about who Jesus was. Jesus never left Israel. His whole ministry was in Israel. He died there. If you're a Christian, you believe he then rose again and ascended, and you believe he's coming back to Israel, the same geographical location. And a lot of Christians sometimes say, well, the Jews disobeyed God, so he had to make a new covenant. taking scripture out of the way, and this is what we would call the replacement theologians, where they believe they're almost the new Jews, the new covenant people. And actually, the whole New Testament is against that very thing, replacement theology. It actually talks about the fact that Christianity, if you imagine it, it talks about this. Say there's a tree, there's a beautiful big tree, and it's rooted very, very deep roots into the earth. And then on that tree is a grafted in branch. It likens the Jewish people as the tree rooted into, say, Hashem, and that root is from God, and this branch is the people who believe in Yeshua. And it says that can easily be snapped off. And so this is literally what our book says. But what you'll find is most Christians, they're not diligent in reading their Bible. They just go with whoever is sort of Christian-y on Instagram or whatever pastors they might have, but almost zero theology courses. Or like when I became ordained and I studied for 2 years theology, there was not one class on the history of who Jesus was, who his disciples were,
Really? Wow.
what anti-Semitism is, the harm that the church has done. Not one. You won't find that in any seminary, no university, no Christian education. So that is why we feel it's imperative to get to leaders, to get to church leaders who actually stand in front of their flock and through acts of omission continue to delegitimize Israel, i.e., the Bible tells us to pray for the peace of Jerusalem, the protection of the people of Jerusalem. It also tells us to give money to the Jews. Any Jews in here, has a Christian ever given you money? I bet zero.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're not here to ask for money, but
No,
thank
I
you
know
so
you're not,
much.
but you
Yeah.
won't see that often. But the Christians who actually read what's in here, which there are less than we realize, they're the Christians who, when I went to Israel just after October 7th, and I went on a bearing witness program, and we went to Kfar Aza, and just before we went in, and it was at the time when it was really early, and I was standing in the little bomb shelter that there's everywhere, those little almost look like bus stops.
Yeah.
And on the outside of it, I recognized a name, a friend I know who's Christian. And I phoned him up immediately and I said, "Is this you? Because there might be some with your name." And he went, "No, it is." I said, "You've never told me that he's a Christian, no Jewish heritage." I said, "You didn't tell me this." He said, "No, I've actually donated over 2,000. I have done that because I'm doing what it says, and I love the Jewish people." So there are many Christians who behind the scenes are doing a lot, but they will never speak of it because one command in our Bible tells us if you do something good for someone, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. Just do it in private, no virtue signaling, just get on with it and crack on, which is another reason why we don't take payment, or we don't take any donations from Jews. We will not take any Jewish money, even for speaking engagements. I get invited to speak alongside other similar speakers. Their fee is always, 5 or 10 grand. I'll take nothing.
Oh, wow, Hayley,
And neither will my husband. No one in our organization, even a donation, we will not accept. And we've been offered hundreds of thousands of pounds, as you can imagine, from wealthy Jews who understand how important this is. But we don't take money. We only want to be a blessing. And we also don't proselytize Jews. We really do not agree with that. Let Jews be Jews. Christians are Christians. We're not here to start spreading the gospel. We're here to fight anti-Semitism. And so we're very clear about that, which is probably why I'm so welcome in Orthodox spaces. I'm literally speaking at a central synagogue on Saturday in Stanmore. So
amazing. Thank you so much, Hayley. You're definitely a blessing and an inspiration. Like a lot of people in our community, I think everyone loves and adore and admire you and
Thank
you hold such a precious place in our heart. Really, like you do such important work. I don't think we've been today where we are if it wasn't for you. Like for real, I think your work really matters, and not only in Christian circles, definitely in our community as well. So thank you.
Thank you. I will do. Thank you so much for having me. I'm off to Poland for the first time this weekend to Auschwitz.
Amazing.
So I'm going to record all of that. I'm sure it'll be very emotional. And I would say to any people that support you, just say thank you. Because they don't want true people, true supporters don't want thanks. They just want to know that you know, that we've got your back, that we do want to actually stand in front of you, not just beside you. And keep the bad man away in the most basic sense of it. God bless you all.
God bless you. Thank
God
you so
bless.
much,
Thank
Haley.
you.
Thank you.
Wonderful to see you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye bye.
Thank you so much.